Welcome to the Football Biz Formula, presented by SFS in partnership with BuzzMyVideos, the podcast where innovation drives the future of football and sports industry, hosted by Paola Marinone. Let's kick off.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Football Biz Formula podcast. Today, we are talking about innovation, football, and technology, of course. And we're talking to Andy Marston. Welcome to the podcast, Andy.
Thanks, Paola. It's lovely to see you again.
Nice to see you again, and I'm really curious to know more about all the things that you are doing. We've known each other for a while now, and you always have something new launching, which is great. Never a boring day, I guess. So let's start from who you are and what you're doing. I was actually saying before we started recording that if you were lining up all of your titles, probably it was very long kind of title, and it was going to cover up all your face. So as far as I know, you're the founder of Sports Pundit Community. You're head of venture for Players Fund. And anything else that I'm missing?
Co-founder of Summitly as well, which launched last
Exactly.
week.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about the three of them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, suppose Sports Pundit's been the longest standing. I launched that, I think it's like over 5 years ago now that I launched that. And it initially started as a newsletter and then has evolved into being focused around kind of social events and podcasts as well. And the thought process was basically like the newsletter gave me a bit more of an audience. Like the sports industry is very network driven. And so it allowed me to kind of accelerate my networking and also like reach a wider kind of a wider audience of people. And then since launching the newsletter, sort of expanding into podcasts and events kind of gave me more of a personal relationship with those people, because obviously a newsletter, you're sending out an email once a week, but you don't necessarily get all that much feedback, and you don't necessarily know someone beyond kind of being able to see the email addresses that are opening or not opening your content. So yeah, it's all been about kind of like building upon that initial base and trying to build kind of more solid relationships with people. And then I guess as of fairly recently, in terms of trying to expand that network even further, I've kind of broadened the podcast to go beyond just me hosting it. And we've brought in kind of specialist hosts in different areas. I'm sure Joe Redfern is a friend of this show. So she's hosting or co-hosting the media.
Hi, Joe.
Yeah, I'm sure she's listening. I mean, she's actually on probably even more podcasts than I am. So maybe she hasn't got time to listen to them as well. But yeah, we've got some awesome hosts, and they all kind of operate across different subject areas, but also are kind of based in different markets, which I think was quite important to me, that we don't kind of completely overlap with one another. But yeah, Sports Pundit, I guess I would bill as a community, like you said. The community is the main thing, and the content is kind of a flywheel to keep engaging that community and offering them value. And then in terms of the other titles that you mentioned, my day job is with the Players Fund, which is, as of quite recently, my title changed to Head of Corporate Venture. And that
Congratulations for that.
Yeah, thank you. That reflects, I guess, like what I would call like a third business arm within the Players Fund. And I can go into a bit more detail maybe a bit later about like what those kind of like pillars of the Players Fund are. But yeah, in terms of leading corporate venture, the idea is partnering with sports and entertainment IP to run either venture programs with them, or in some cases down the line, it might also just be sort of like innovation hubs where they're not necessarily taking equity sort of from day one. And it's essentially kind of leveraging the expertise and the back end of the Players Fund and kind of offering that as a service to, yeah, in this case, with Como Football Club, it's a football club, but it could also be a league or an organization outside of football.
Yeah, we're definitely going to explore a bit more about that, because that's something you just announced. So it's interesting to just deep dive on that. And then third line of business, because you're really busy.
Yeah. I mean, we can spend most of the time on that one. I think like that's my day job, and that's where like most of my attention is at the moment. But I did also, and it's kind of like announcements like London buses, I guess, like all these things have been kind of working towards for probably like 6 to 12 months. but it also launched in the same week as everything else, is Summitly, which is basically like just an idea that I've had for a while and kind of shared with a few people from the Sports Pundit group, around kind of like the discoverability of conferences, which I guess is relevant to this podcast, because there's a lot of amazing conferences that maybe you're not like aware of them, or you're not aware that they're happening or who's going until quite near the event. So the idea was basically to try to create almost like an aggregator platform, which allows you to see all of the events that are happening around the sort of global sports industry, so that you can discover new ones that maybe you haven't been to before, or also if you're traveling out to Turin to go to SFS, you might also notice that there's like, I don't know, a social event happening the day before, or some other event that's kind of in and around the conference that kind of like adds to your experience while you're there. And so, yeah, it was just kind of meant to kind of amplify and improve visibility around kind of events and conferences. And I can claim the initial idea, but James Hay, who's built it, deserves most of the credit, because an idea is just an idea, and he's the one that brought that to life and has put a lot of effort and work into delivering that. So yeah, I would call him the real creator of it. But yeah, it's been cool to see that go live as well.
Fantastic. Now let's deep dive a bit more on the Players Fund and what you just launched as well with Como. So what exactly is, like, in your role of corporate, what is it that you do for rights holders, and why you do it that way?
Yeah, sure. So I guess maybe it's worth starting with a bit of an explanation of the Players Fund, because that probably then informs everything else. So the Players Fund is an athlete-backed venture firm, and the initial, I guess, pillar of the Players Fund, and the kind of core pillar, is that they have a venture fund, which is backed largely by athletes. There's also some artists and celebrities, and then some kind of like strategic high net worth investors that maybe have like a connection into a certain industry. But within that kind of initial pool of capital that I guess the athletes have put in, that is then being invested into early stage businesses, seed to Series A. And we're looking for sort of tech enabled business in general. We're not a sports tech fund, which I think is like kind of a misconception a lot of the time. Like, I think people see athletes and investing and just assume sports tech, but it's a broader fund than that. The kind of thesis, I guess, of the fund, without going really into depth on it, is more around the fact that athletes have sort of unparalleled access. And so in venture, a lot of the kind of most aspirational companies at that early stage, they get investment very quickly from the same kind of pool of tier one funds that have like those good relationships with the kind of high caliber founders. And so if you're a new fund trying to break in, you kind of have to come at it with a different approach. And so credit to Rory and Fergus who founded it. Like, their approach was, if we can leverage the athletes and the access the athletes have, we can maybe co-invest alongside these tier one funds, because we add like a different dimension to the round, and they'll want us alongside them. So we write fairly small tickets into the companies that we invest in, but generally alongside kind of like what you'd consider like kind of like a top tier fund for investing at that stage.
And any investment that you want to mention that was done in the past from the Players Fund?
Yeah, we've done about 8 or 9 now, I think, and some of them, I guess, have a overlap into sports and entertainment. We've invested into Seat Unique, which is a ticketing platform for sort of like hospitality that has like quite an extensive tech component to it in terms of pricing and reaching new audiences. And then Hanakuma, which was founded by Naomi Osaka, which is sort of a media production business. But then we'll also invest in stuff that has nothing to do with sport in any way. So we invested into a company called Gibran, which is like an AI platform. It's not an LLM. It's like a new form of like AI, which is far more complicated than I can probably do justice to. Which just had like a really interesting breakthrough. And then we've invested into stuff like Partao, which is like sourcing kind of like specialist machinery and kind of car parts for, you know, whether it's like farmers or people that work in kind of like factories and stuff. So like, and that's founded
That's
by
fairly
people
broad. That goes very broad.
Yeah, it's like ex Amazon logistics people, right? That like have seen like an opportunity within like a really specific niche. So we're just trying to back really good founders, and I guess the opportunity really is kind of, we're the bridge between athletes and the venture capital ecosystem. We're not necessarily just going to invest into sports tech.
Sure. And is there any, so you're based in the UK as a fund, but is there any geographical kind of preferences, or like you work globally?
I think when we started, like the initial kind of interest is, you know, UK and Europe is underserved versus the US. But we'll still look at stuff in the US. Like, I think you kind of have to. But I would say a majority of our investments so far have been European. And a lot of our athlete base is also kind of UK European. I think it's a lot more common already in the States for athletes to be involved in venture. So there was a bit more of an opportunity, I think, to leverage the fact that there isn't as many athlete collectives and there isn't as much knowledge or awareness, I guess, of venture when it comes to kind of European athletes.
Yeah, that's very much like early days for this kind of activity here in Europe. Is like one of the very first ones that I've heard of, to be honest, in the space. So I'm sure that there's going to be more, but I think that's definitely it's opening up the space.
There's one or two others that will often kind of get lumped into the same category as. I would say, like, generally the other athlete-backed funds that exist currently in Europe are more sort of sports tech focused than we are, so they're probably a little bit more they're not as generalist, I guess is probably the best way to describe it, as to the way that the Players Funds portfolio looks. But yeah, I think where it's maybe then interesting to kind of go a little bit further on is like the other two pillars. So because they're a bit more sports related and maybe a bit more relevant to the
Sure.
audience, to the podcast. So the second one is like investing into sports assets. So we won't do that through the fund because it's kind of it's obviously later stage and doesn't really fit the thesis of the sort of seed Series A. And so we'll do what are called like SPVs, which is special purpose vehicles, which is basically where we'll get offered an allocation. And it might be in like a football team or an F1 team, or like some real examples are like we invested into Tomorrow Sports, which hosts the TGL Golf. And we invested into the Hexagon Cup as well. And those investments are basically, we can go to our athlete base that are involved through the fund, and we can say to them like, hey, we've got this opportunity to invest into TGL. Like, if you like, here's why we think it's a good investment. If you're interested, like, you can come in. But for those deals, it's not a case of all of the athletes' money being put in. It's a case of specific athletes saying, yeah, I want to go into that deal. So it's more of a case-by-case basis. That's kind of the second pillar. And then the third pillar, which is, I guess, the one that's just been announced and the one that I'm most directly involved in, is then saying like, well, we've got this experience in terms of sourcing deals within venture. We've got really good relationships with athletes already. What if we were to also use that same thesis of like athletes equals access when it comes to sort of sports teams and sports and entertainment IP, right? Because again, a bit like an athlete, like there's a lot of value that sports organizations can bring to the table when it comes to venture, because people recognize them. They're amazing incubators. They touch on like loads of different industries. And I think that's really important. Like, this isn't just we're not just going to be investing in like fan engagement tech. Like, it can go a lot broader than that, right? So we basically had this theory that we could take what we do for our own fund and almost offer that as a service for a rights holder that maybe has started to identify the opportunity of like incubating early stage businesses, but doesn't quite know how to go about that themselves. Or even if they have figured out how to do it themselves, that it would just cost them a lot of money, and there would be a lot of like litigation, I guess, around setting that up in-house, like within a sports team. So we basically said
it also requires a lot of skill set and decision making. It requires a lot of ticking a lot of boxes. So it's basically you're white labeling the solution in a way that you build through their expertise.
It's basically a white labeled VC for for Como in this case, but it could be any sports organization. Obviously, we'd be quite selective about who we would want to do a white labeled solution for. Like, we only have a certain amount of bandwidth, so we'll be fairly rigorous, I guess, in like which organizations we work with, and we can go into more detail on like how we identified Como and how we'd identify maybe other rights holders. But yeah, I mean, the goal is, partner with them, then speak very closely with the staff within the company, figure out what their kind of innovation needs are and like where there's opportunity to innovate. Then we create an investment thesis together of like, these are the areas that we would maybe want to invest. And then it would be a case of us as the players fund doing a lot of deal sourcing. So like, we'll have identified kind of key areas for Como that they want to innovate. And then it's on us as the players fund to go and find companies that could maybe help solve those problems that Como want to solve for. So
let's talk about the Como specifically. You just announced it last week, if I'm not wrong. It's super recent. And why Como, and what exactly it looks like, the program that you just launched. So let's dig down on why, because I know the football club and their approach, and that's definitely very unique and interesting to look at. It might not be as known from the audience. I think it's good to understand why Como is the first one as well to be launched, and what you're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think Como is a perfect first club because they're essentially like the startup of European football, right? Like, they've grown really fast. They have a very lean but very ambitious team, and so they can make decisions quite quickly. They're very entrepreneurial already. Like, there's a lot of examples, and I think Merwan spoke about a lot of them at last year's event for SFS in terms of like having their own brewery, and I think since that event they've launched their own tourism business as well. So like, there's a lot of areas outside of just the football pitch in which they are innovating and kind of building businesses. And so I think, like, to the point I made earlier about being much more generalist, like, that really suits us with them because, you know, we can focus on a business that's maybe in the travel industry rather than the football industry, which might have a much bigger opportunity for return than just like a fan engagement tool that serves only the sports industry. So like, a big part of it was the people involved, like people like Moan and Ryan Shelton and Mo Daba that are at Como are super motivated, ambitious, entrepreneurial, want to get stuff done. Completely got it from the moment we started talking to them, like why this could be interesting and how this could kind of accelerate their ambitions for everything else within the club. Like, we didn't want this to just be a side project that they get bored of after announcing kind of 2 weeks in. So the fact that this is so kind of integrated into all of the other plans that they have as a club was really important to us.
Because that's the difficulty of running a program like that. It's like the nice, shiny new object, but this is actually a long-term investment. It's something that you want to build for the long term. So it's important that it's very much linked to the business, and then the decision makers are buying for the long term. So that then it really returns in terms of the fund, but as well in terms of business as a whole.
Yeah, it's like really important to us that the companies we're bringing in are like not just pilots for the sake of doing a pilot and sort of ticking a marketing box, but they're actually like pivotal to them achieving their business objectives as a club, because that's the only way that there's going to be real motivation to properly engage with the companies and the founders, and so that the value add is like really there on both sides. It's not it doesn't feel one-sided or kind of like, we'll just give you this, like, you can just stick this badge on your pitch deck and that's it. Like, we really don't want it to be like that. So yeah, it was really important to us that they were fully behind it and backing it. And then my role as sort of head of corporate venture and working specifically with Como is basically to be the conduit between the founders and the club, because most clubs won't have someone that can kind of maybe handle that on a more day-to-day basis. And we don't want them to be overwhelmed with kind of questions from founders and applications and all that stuff. They've got a lot of other stuff that they need to get on with. So my role is to basically be that kind of outpost for the founders and streamline, I guess, what gets through and what filters through to the club, so that they're not getting overwhelmed by all this information and all this kind of like requests for attention.
And let's talk about like you have an application. So there's an application process right now. So what are you looking for from this program, and what's the deadline? What's the process, so that founders in the space might be interested in actually applying? So tell us more about that.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the application process, there's a website which is attached to the Como Football website, which is just venture.comofootball.com. And you get walked through all the steps on there. But essentially, we're looking for companies that are probably between sort of seed and Series A that want to sort of test and grow, leveraging Como 1907's environment, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean just on field or training pitch. It might be that you're a travel business, like I said, and there's a way to integrate you into the tourism stuff that they're doing, or maybe you're a mobility solution and there's a way to leverage you in terms of like transport to and from the stadium, or the fact that Uber's their front of shirt partner, right? So like we want it to be, we don't necessarily just want football businesses, but obviously we are open to football businesses as well. Como's done a really good job building out their own sort of football analytics and sort of data department, I guess, which Mo has led. But essentially, the process is go to the website. You can see all of the kind of like information about the program there. You apply. There's an application form where you share your pitch deck and a little bit of information about your company. We'll then evaluate those companies, and that evaluation will be based on kind of which companies best fit the needs of Como, and which companies are going to be most impactful in terms of being integrated into the environment. And we'll try to pick between 3 and 4. In the case of Como, like we've gone very broad with the themes, because we wanted to be open to kind of just the best possible companies, and then but we won't necessarily pick something from every category, right? So, there's a health technology and human performance category, and there's a media technology and new platforms category. And there's also like sustainability and environment. We might not pick something from all 3 of those. It might be that we pick 2 from 1, right? Because it's just like an area where a lot of really good companies end up applying.
Sure. Yeah, it's very broad anyway, so it could be very, very many things.
The broadness is basically because we want it to be like that, because this is going to be a multi-year thing. And like one year we might pick 2 companies in hospitality, and then the next year we might pick 2 that are in human performance, right? Like priorities and business objectives within Como might adapt or change, and the quality of companies applying in a certain space might also adapt and change. So we wanted to be quite fluid in terms of making sure that we weren't just picking something because we had to like tick a box in that category. So we've been quite broad on purpose for that reason.
And so the application is open, and what's the deadline for the application, so that the founders?
Yeah, deadline is the 31st of October. And then after that, we'll be in touch with companies that we want to move forwards with. We may be in touch with some companies before that, but like that will be kind of when the application closes. And then the idea is that there'll be a pitch day, which will probably be towards the end of November. I don't think the official date has been announced publicly yet, but it'll be towards the end of November. After SFS, I think. And that will be basically a chance for the companies that have made the shortlist to pitch themselves in front of a room of Como executives, maybe some other sports executives, some other investors, and maybe like strategically kind of interesting people to have in the room, maybe some partners of Como and things like that. That will happen sort of end of November. And then the plan would be to go live with some sort of kind of like real sort of environment testing from January, which could be sort of like a 6-month pilot, sort of from January to the end of the season. And then as the sort of season closes up, there'll be a demo day, which is basically a chance to kind of reflect on that integration and the results of that integration. And then there'll be a negotiation on kind of how Como wants to continue to operate or work with that company. but that cohort will then close, and like applications will open for kind of like cohort 2.
For the next one. That's very interesting. Exciting times for industry and for Kobo as well, and for you. I guess that's going to be interesting to build it up from scratch. It's good partners to have. Definitely, both very humble and ambitious at the same time, which is a good combination. So I'm really looking forward to see what are the results of the first cohort. Well, thank you for sharing all of the details, and thank you for sharing your experience, and keep building. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Paula.
Bye, everyone. See you at the next episode of the Football Biz Formula. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cool. See you later.